Hello everyone, greetings from PayTap's technical support team. In this series, you will learn how to integrate with PayTaps through our PT2 API endpoints. And here, we will walk you through the third integration type, which is the managed form. For the purpose of this series, we have created a very simple Laravel project to walk you through the integration process. But feel free to follow the steps in this series with your own project, whatever the programming language or the framework used to integrate with PayTaps. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to start the actual payment initiation and we are going to learn about the required parameters that you need to initiate a payment, and we are going to initiate our first payment using these required parameters. So let's get started. The first thing you should know is that you can find the full documentation for this part inside PayTap support portal under the article called the Managed Form APIs Integration Manual. From the integration manual over here, if we navigate to step 3, initiate the payment, and then part 2, initiate the payment, here you will see that the payment initiation is actually clarified in two parts or distinguished into two parts, which is the front end side, which handling the JS and the payment form, and of course the back end side, which will send the request. So let's get through it. Starting with the front end side over here, the first thing you will see that of course you need to have your payment, or you need to have your domain over here. You can get your domain from this solution article to learn what is my regional endpoint URL. You'll need to get your endpoint URL from this solution article. The endpoint is actually dedicated based on the region, so for each region your account and you will need to use the associated endpoint for it or domain for it. Now, once you have your endpoint or your domain, you will need to fulfill these requirements. So the requirement is your website, or these are the requirements that the origin requester, or which is your website, needs to have for this managed form. It should be a valuable bashable URL. It should be an HTTPS, so a request cannot be sent from a normal HTTP client. It should be secured. Okay. The host name should contain a domain that has at least one dot in it, though this means it cannot be sent through localhost. This should be sent through a domain that has one dot. Okay, it should not contain, some extra remarks like the double dot or the slash, and of course, it should not be any path component. So be sure that you fulfill this requirement, because not fulfilling the above requirement or these requirements may result in facing the error access to XML HTTPS request has been blocked by course policy. Now, once you have provided this requirement, it's now the time to implement the payment form. So the payment form implementation is very simple. So we start by creating a simple payment form that has a simple inputs, one for the card number, one for the expiry date, of course the expiry month and the expiry year, and one for the security code. These inputs will be all will be a text inputs. It will have these names. Okay. Once you have implemented this part, okay, you will need to modify it from this typical form to be the next thing, which is adding. Of course, the first thing you'll need to add the payload script over here. The payload script will contain this path over here, and we'll start with the domain based on your region, the domain that we learned how to get it previously. So you will add your domain here, then you'll add the external path over here. Now this will be added to a script source, and now you have added the payload script. The next thing, you will add the action to your server. This will be your own form, so this form will be submitted to your server. Normally, it will be using the method post, of course. Now, the next thing is to remove all the names from the card number, the expiry date, the security code, and change it with the attribute data-paylib. Now, this is a very important step. Missing it will not make the payment done, so you'll need, of course, to change all the names for the card number, the expiry month, the expiry year, the CVV, to contain the data paylib instead of names. Now, once you have attached, of course, as we mentioned before, the paylib, you have configured all the the over here all the names to be data paylib over here. The next thing is you will need to add this very simple configuration for the data paylib. This will configuration will be part of the request, and it will allow you to add or to receive the payment error inside your code. So as you can see, you can add this payment error span, and this span will show any errors in the payment. It will work like a validation. Now, this simple validation, or this actually simple configuration, will look something like this. All what you just need to take it as it is, and you'll need to configure it to have your API key over here. Now, as you can see over here, you will need to use your client key, not your normal API key, and you will learn how to get your client key from the solution article, how to get my authentication integration API key. Now, once you have done all of that, and once the payment is submitted, these details will be sent to PayTabs, and it will be replaced to payment token, and this payment token will be received inside your request that will be sent to your backend. So let's see how we have done this over here. I'm going to my front end, to my blade over here. As you can see, I have added my own form. My own form contains customer details, contain different things. I have here my customer details object. I am sending this to my backend payment/managed. I'm using a method post. I have added the customer details. Now this is the important part over here, which is the payment details. This is the errors, the span errors. Now getting to my card number over here. You see that I have changed the data paylib. Now number, it has the same size, of course. I have done the same for the expiry month, the expiry year, and the security code, the CVV. Of course, I have added the configuration over here. As you can see, I have added my configuration over here. Now, and of course, you need to remember to attach the script over here. So will use a merchant dashboard inside Egypt. So this is the domain for Egypt, and this is the whole endpoint, or the whole actually script source. So this is how I have done my front end, and combinedly, as I have added customer details for it, and I have added a shipping details, this is how it looks like. Simply, I have here the payment details form. This is my own form. All of my form will be sent automatically. All of these details will be sent normally. I'm using names for all of them. The only part that will be changed into the payment token is this part over here, the payment detail. And of course, the sensitive data, these details will not be sent to my server as mentioned before. Now we can get back to the next part of step 3. Let's zoom out a bit. The next part, as we mentioned, is the back end side. Now, the back end side is a very simple and regular step. You will receive this details, all the details that you have sent from your request over here. So whatever the details I'm sending from this request form, and along with it, related to this payment detail, you will receive something called the payment token, which you will need to send to PayTabs. So what are the details that you need to initiate a request to PayTabs with? So over here, you will see all the required parameters. These are the minimum required parameter that you need to have. So the required parameters are, let's get it, the profile ID, the tran type, reflected for the transaction type, the tran class, reflected for the transaction class, the card details, which is the card ID, card description, card currency, card amount, and adding to these required parameters, you will need to have your payment token, the token that we have generated from the card details, and of course you will need to have the customer details. Now normally if we are initiating our payment through hosted payment page or invoices, the customer details is not required because the customer will be redirected to a hosted payment page, and if the request does not have the customer details, he will be access to refill his customer details. But now, since you are submitting the payment yourself, you will need to fulfill the customer details along with the required parameters. So, of course, there are other optional parameters we are going to learn more about in the upcoming videos. But for now, we just want to learn about the required parameters. So starting with the profile ID, the profile ID is one of your key fields you can get from your merchant dashboard. It's like an end identifier for yourself. As mentioned before, you can check our solution article, how to get your account information, and inside your account you'll find the profile ID. For the transaction type and the transaction class, these are, let's say, are the configuration for your transaction. You are saying what type this transaction are. Paytabs has multiple types of transaction like auth, sale, refund. There are multiple transaction types. So if you want to learn more about these transaction types and the differences between them, you can check what is transaction type solution article, and you will learn about all of these transaction types. Now, the next thing, of course, the transaction class is the same for configuring. The next thing is the card details. Of course, the card details is very important. Card ID, card description are just an identifier for your order or your detail. The card currency is the currency that your order will be done in it. So this currency must be configured inside your Paytabs profile. And the card amount is the amount that the customer will be deducted. So adding to this is of course the payment token. We have learned what is the payment token, and we have learned how it's going to be generated. You are going to receive it inside the request. And of course the customer details, which is the customer name, the customer email, customer phone, customer street, city, state, country, zip code, and IP. Now, all of these details, if you want to learn about the specification and more details of it, just by clicking on it in this solution article, you will get redirected to a solution article that talks about the specification of this parameter. So now that we have learned the required parameter, let's take a look how it will look inside our code. Now, of course, I have sent all these required parameters from this form over here. I have only sent the customer details from here. I have sent some additional details like the payment type, some things that I'm going to do some condition in it inside my code. But for more importance, you should not send your card detail, your order details, which is the card details, through your own, let's say, through your own front end. So what I need you to do, what I need you to normally do, is just send like a product ID or something like that, and get all the card details like the card amount and card currency from your backend or from your database. This will help you to avoid any modifying inside your request before the payment is done. So this is just a security step for you. Now coming up over here, our request payload should look like this. So these are the required parameter, this is the payment token, and before we get to the simple response payload, let's get back to our code over here, and as we moved before, we are going to create the request payload over here inside the data wrapper. So these are the required parameters. As you can see, the profile ID, I have saved it inside my environment file. I'm getting it over here. Of course, feel free to just typically enter it over here, but I'm doing this for a better clarification. The transaction type, the transaction class, I'm getting it from my config file over here. Of course, I'm using the transaction type sale and the transaction class ecom. Going from the card details, I'm getting all the card details from my request. And finally, of course, the customer details is generated from also my request. I'm passing it over here. I am doing a simple customer details generation. Let's see over here. I am doing the customer details generation over here. Generate customer details. I'm creating the object. I'm adding it to all the details. And finally, the payment token, as you can see. Let's go to the managed. The payment token. This is the payment token that I'm going to receive from my front end. And finally, this is one of our optional parameter, which is the return URL. The return URL is the URL that your customer will be redirected to after the payment. This is just an optional parameter we are going to learn more about in the future. So for now, before I actually initiate the payment, I want to show you the request coming from my front end. So I'm going back to my controller over here, and I'm going to over here to my request, and I'm going to die and debug it. Let's die and debug the request coming from my front end. Actually, let's just die and debug the request coming from the final request that I'm going to actually send to Paytabs. So over here, before sending it to my my trait, which is the client. I'm going to dying debug it over here. Let's put up response. Okay. So this is the final response over here that will be sent to my HTTP client and therefore sent to pay tabs. So over here, I'm going to get back to my code, going to reload it. I'm going to fill out my customer details. I'm going to fill out my card details. Let's say to use this one, 411111. This was one of our test cards. Now let's check it out. As you can see, of course, I have the request over here, the parameters. This is all the parameters. I have the customer details, I have the shipping details is empty, the card details, and this is the token coming from PayTab. This is the final token that I'm going to change it into the payment token. Now let's get back over here. Let's remove the dying debug. Of course, from here. Let's make sure that we have removed it from here also. Just want to make sure I remove it. Now I'm going to re-enter my payment, my card details. Going to check it out, and the payment should be done successfully. And normally over here you'll see I have just printed out this should not be normally viewed to your customers. Of course, I've just printed out over here so you can see this payment is done successfully. If we navigate it to our dashboard over here, I've signed in, inside our transactions, you will see that the payment is done successfully, and over here you will see that the payment method is managed form, so that's that the managed form is working normally and everything is working normally. Now, a final thing that you should know is that this response should vary or should change based on the carder scheme. So there are two types of cards that may enter your managed form. So the card should be maybe a 3DS secure card or maybe a non-3DS secure card. And actually, if we navigate it over here about our test cards, and over here you'll see that we have a solution article called what are the test cards available for you. The test card, you can check it from your merchant dashboard or inside over here. You will see over here that we have a card that is valid or have a 3D enrolled and card that is not. So how will this card scheme or card type affects your payment? So if the card is not 3D enrolled, as you can see, the payment will be done immediately. Nothing will happen. The customer will not require anything else. But another thing or another scenario, if the card is not 3D, is actually 3D enrolled, like this one, for example. So this means that the customer will need to fulfill an OTP before finalizing the payment. So as you can see here, if we done a payment through a non-3DS, let's get back to our response over here. If we done the payment through a normal non-3DS, okay, that means that the card does not require 3D or secure authentication, does not require an OTP from the issuer side. So the payment will be done immediately. You receive the payment response. But if the card is 3D secured, instead you will receive a redirect URL that you should redirect your customer to. So as you can see here inside my controller, let's get back to my controller. You can see here that I'm making a simple check inside my return. So first I'm checking if the property of this response contain a payment result, and this payment result has a response status equal to A, so I'm going to return my success view. Now instead, if the property does not exist, which is payment result, and the payment response status is not A, the else for it, I will return my view for the error, because if I have the payment result and the payment result is not A, which is authenticated or successfully, it means it is an error, so I'm going to return this error into my view. So It's not this. This means that I don't have a payment result, and this means that instead I have a redirect URL and I want to redirect my customer to this redirect URL. So again, I'm going this time to use a 3DS card, and I want you to see the difference. Over here, I'm going to use this 3DS card. As you can see, I have here, this is 3DS enrolled. So I'm going to use this card over here, just a random expiration date. And once I press checkout, you will see that I will not be returned to my success or my error page. Instead, I'm redirecting my customer to this 3D secure simulation. Of course, in a live profile, it will be the OTP form and all of this detail. And once the payment is authenticated, if you remember, we had a return over here, a return URL. Once the payment is done, the OTP level is done, the 3D secure is done, the customer will be redirected back to my normal success page or error page. So this is what happened. This is the extra information that you need to learn about the different responses. Of course, we have different test cards over here, that's 3 enrolled and that is not 3D enrolled. And you can see the difference between the response over here, between the 3D enrolled and the non-3D enrolled. Of course, the 3D secure cards will have a redirect URL. The non-3DS secure card will have the payment done immediately, so it will contain a payment result. Inside our code, we have checked if we have a payment result and it's an A, so we are going to return our success view. If it's not an A, we are going to return our error view. And if it's not contain a payment result, that means it contain a redirect URL. So I want to redirect my customer to this redirect URL, which is simulate the authentication level for 3D secured card. And once it's finished, the customer will be redirected back to my return URL. So this is simply how you can initiate a payment. And we have actually initiated two kind of payment, one through a 3DS secure card and another through a non-3DS secure card. So now we can go on and learn more about the optional parameter. So let's move forward.